We're live here in Washington as it's confirmed there are no survivors of a crash involving a passenger jet with 64 people on board and a military helicopter. Investigations are ongoing to establish what caused the collision near Ronald Reagan Airport. Among the victims were Russian ice skating coaches and some of the teenagers they trained. President Trump spoke from the White House in the last hour.
This was a dark and excruciating night in our nation's capital and in our nation's history, and a tragedy of terrible proportions.
Donald Trump then blamed diversity policies for making air travel less safe.
Well, here in Washington, D.C., an investigation is underway to discover just what caused the United States' most deadly air crash in more than 20 years. Emergency teams are working right behind me here to discover where two aircraft, a passenger jet with 64 people on board and a military helicopter collided and crashed into the Potomac River. 67 people have been killed, 64 of them on the American Airlines plane and 3 on the US Army helicopter. No one survived. This is what we know so far about events leading up to the crash. The passenger jet, American Airlines Flight 5342, had been flying from Wichita in Kansas, bound for Washington. At just before 9 p.m. local time, in clear conditions, it was on its final approach into Ronald Reagan Airport and flying through some of the world's busiest airspace, routinely used by both civilian and military aircraft. At the same time, a US Army Black Hawk helicopter, its route shown here in red, was approaching from the north. As the passenger jet was about to land, the collision occurred. Several videos, including the one that you can see here, captured that moment. Well, rescue teams have been facing an incredibly difficult task through the night and working in freezing conditions. Here's our report now from our North America editor, Sarah Smith.
In the freezing cold Potomac River, emergency services spent the night desperately looking for survivors. The wreckage of American Airlines Flight 5342 is in 3 separate pieces in the water. There were 60 passengers and 4 crew on board, 3 soldiers in the Army helicopter that collided with it. The bodies of at least 30 people killed in the accident have been recovered so far. CCTV pictures show the moment of impact. Very low in the sky over Washington, D.C., the helicopter and the plane rapidly heading towards each other, and then we can see the sudden explosion. On closer footage, we can see the crash quite clearly. By morning, it was obvious that no one had survived the crash.
Despite all those efforts, we are now at a point where we are switching from a rescue operation to a recovery operation. At this point, we don't believe there are any survivors from this accident. And we have recovered 27 people from the plane and 1 from the helicopter.
There are recordings from air traffic control as the accident happened.
Crash. This is alert 3. Crash.
Fire command. The accident happened in the river. The helicopter and the plane crashed in the river.
An investigation is already underway into how this accident could have occurred on a clear night when both aircraft were following standard flight patterns. Military helicopters do fly over and around Washington all the time. This Black Hawk was on a nighttime training flight. And we know air traffic control were speaking to the helicopter pilot that he could see the passenger jet and was told to pass behind the plane shortly before the collision. President Trump asked for a moment's silence for what he called a tragedy of terrible proportions, before quickly blaming equal opportunity policies and air traffic control for making flying less safe.
The initiative is part of the FAA's diversity and inclusion hiring plan. Think of that. The initiative is part of the FAA's diversity and inclusion hiring plan, which says diversity is integral to achieving FAA's mission of ensuring safe and efficient travel. I don't think so. I think it's just the opposite.
How you can come to the conclusion right now that diversity had something to do with this crash?
Because I have common sense, okay?
And it is just common sense, apparently. No evidence has been presented to connect diversity policies with this or any air accident. But Donald Trump has instantly turned a tragedy into yet another battleground in his culture war against what he calls the wokeism that he says has infected American public life. Sarah Smith, BBC News, Washington.
Well, eyewitnesses say everything about the plane's approach into Washington looked normal. So just what do we know about how this terrible crash unfolded? Nick Eardley from BBC Verify has this report.
These are the moments before a military helicopter collided with an American Airlines plane. This live feed from the Kennedy Center shows the skyline of Washington, D.C. On the right is the passenger plane, finishing a 2-hour flight from Kansas. On board, 64 people, including figure skaters returning from a competition. On the left, the military helicopter with 3 people on board. And here, another passenger plane. It's very common for planes and helicopters to share airspace in DC. In fact, US Transport Secretary Sean Duffy said nothing out of the ordinary happened in the run-up to the crash. But there were at least 2 near misses at the airport last year alone. Watch as both aircraft move closer together over about a minute. This is their flight path, according to the tracking website ADSB Exchange. The helicopter coming from the top in red, the plane arriving from the bottom in blue. It's 8:47 p.m. local time, around 25 seconds before impact. We also have air traffic control audio, which has been published online. As the 2 aircraft get closer, we can hear a conversation. This appears to be the air traffic controller flagging the presence of the plane. The helicopter is referred to PAT-25. The plane is CRJ.
CRJ in flight.
This response appears to be from the helicopter acknowledging the plane is there.
Aircraft in sight, precision separation.
There's a second recording from Air Control 2. The audio is less clear, but it sounds like the helicopter is told to pass behind the plane.
This could have been a situational awareness issue, and the pilots of the Black Hawk just may not have seen because the aircraft was coming into their peripheral vision, and they've mistaken who that they are reporting to ATC that they have visual clearance of.
But the plane and the helicopter get closer to each other, and then this happens. Back to the flight radar. You can see the plane and helicopter getting close to each other. The passenger plane is on a steady descent for landing. One tracking site, ADSB Exchange, records the helicopter gaining, then losing altitude. And this is the aftermath. The plane and its 60 passengers have crashed into the freezing Potomac River.
Well, the American Airlines plane was carrying 64 passengers and crew when it collided with that military helicopter with 3 soldiers on board. At least 14 of the passengers on the plane were athletes, coaches and family members involved in US figure skating. Laura Scott reports now on the impact of this loss on the figure skating world.
Brimming with enthusiasm at a training camp for the figure skating champions of tomorrow. Among them the teenager Spencer Lane, a regional champion full of promise and passion. Less than 24 hours ago, he said a national development camp in Wichita had been an amazing experience. But this picture was the last he posted, confirming tragically what many within the figure skating community had feared, that he had been on board Flight 5342.
Gina Hahn.
So too had fellow skater Gina Hahn. Both had been accompanied on the plane by their mothers and coaches, according to the Skating Club of Boston, which has been left reeling.
We were informed of a pretty horrific tragedy. 2 coaches, 2 teenage athletes, and the athletes' moms. 6 is a horrific number for us, but we're fortunate and grateful it wasn't more than 6. This will have long-reaching impacts for our skating community.
The 2 coaches known to be on board were married couple Zhenya Shishkova and Vadim Nomov, who in 1994 won World Championship gold in pairs for Russia and competed at the Olympics. They'd been helping to develop young skaters in Boston since 2017. There are reports that as many as 15 people on the American Airlines flight might have been involved in figure skating, representing a quarter of all passengers and a heavy loss for the sport.
There's so many people on that flight, but these guys were really special to our community. and the development of skating throughout the world.
Please join us now in a moment of silence as we think of those who have been lost and their loved ones.
Tributes paid today at the European Figure Skating Championships in Estonia, as the sport reflects on lives and talent taken too soon. Laura Scott, BBC News.
Search and rescue teams worked through the night to scour the water in freezing temperatures. But as we've been hearing, authorities no longer expect to find any survivors. And this has switched to a recovery operation, as Tom Bateman now reports.
Daybreak lit up the rescue site and divers braved the freezing waters of the Potomac. Given the temperatures, it became clear there were few hopes of finding survivors, and the authorities said both aircraft had been located.
The fuselage of the American Airlines plane was inverted. It's been located in 3 different sections. It's in about waist-deep water, so that recovery is going to go on today as that recovery takes place of the fuselage of the aircraft.
Recovery teams have discovered debris as far afield as a mile downriver, while wreckage could still be seen protruding from the water close to the airport.
Well, this has now switched from a rescue to a recovery effort. This is one of the closest points that we can get to the airport, a bit further down the river here, as the investigation continues into why this accident happened here in one of the country's busiest air routes.
Kelly Matthews runs a gym on the river where she says people told her what they heard.
That it was just very loud. It sounded like, a large car crash and just lots of sirens and things.
Tell me, what's the mood then locally in terms of the community?
It's terrible. Yeah, everyone's just distraught. And so it's been shocking to everyone.
It just didn't feel right because it's, I fly with the smaller jets like that when it was coming in, and I see the helicopters all the time going through here. I see Marine One constantly going back and forth and to Andrews over there, and it just, I don't know, it just kind of shocking.
Now a passenger plane and a military helicopter remain in the waters within a few mile radius of the White House, one of the world's best-known cityscapes and work no one wanted to see, an accident officials say was absolutely preventable. Tom Bateman, BBC News, Washington.
Well, let's talk some more about this now. We can go live to our North America editor, Sarah Smith. Sarah, we heard from President Trump earlier. He was expressing his condolences about this event, but he also politicised it, very quick to blame his predecessors.
Yeah, it was an extraordinary press conference because he pivoted so quickly from asking for a moment of silence for the victims of this to ripping into Presidents Biden and Obama, saying that their policies had made air travel considerably less safe, and fundamentally blaming equal opportunity and diversity policies for bringing the wrong people into the air traffic control, I think is what he was getting at, people who he was suggesting were not up to the job. But he did also say that they didn't know what caused this crash, but we have some very strong ideas and opinions, he said. He had no evidence for his blaming of these equal opportunity hiring policies. And the man who was the transport secretary under President Biden, Pete Buttigieg, he hit back very quickly, saying it was despicable to be trying to turn this into a political battle. And he said that Donald Trump should be leading, not lying in a situation like this. And I mean, not only is it extraordinarily political, it's really unusual to point the finger of blame in any direction this early into an investigation like this. Normally, the authorities and politicians are scrupulous about not assigning any blame until they've got far more facts. But Donald Trump has clearly ripped up that rule book and decided that he can point the finger of blame where it best suits him, even before he's got the facts to back it up.